Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of AngularAir. I'm your host, Justin Schwarzenberger, and today we are going to be discussing using third-party libraries within Angular code. So let's get after it. Our panelists today, we got Austin McDaniel joining us. Austin, what's going on?
How's it going, everyone? Happy to be on.
And we got Bonnie Brennan with us. Bonnie, how's it going?
Hello, it's great.
Awesome. Our guest today is Joe Skeen. Joe, what's going on?
Oh, it's a beautiful day here in Salt Lake City, except for all the smoke from the fire that went on.
All right. Well, we're glad you're joining us. Why don't you give our viewers a little background on who you are, what you got going on, that sort of thing, so they can get to know you.
Sure. I've been programming as long as I can remember. It's just a lot of fun to be able to put things together and see how they work and tweak it and make things even better. But if I wasn't a developer, I would be a teacher because I absolutely love, sharing knowledge with other people, helping them understand things. And that moment when the light bulb just turns on and they're like, oh, I totally get it. It's just a total payoff for me. So I really like doing teaching, and I've started doing some conference talks locally here, and I spoke at ngConf this last year. So it's just a lot of fun. I enjoy doing stuff like this, and so I'm really happy to be on the show.
And I think everybody has to recognize your daughter. I think your daughter kind of stole the show. Your adorable little daughter, Gwen, was so cute. She was like the star of ngConf, and she was adorable.
She was, and she knew it. She's doing great. She's in first grade now. In fact, she's in school right now, and but we're getting really excited about, between things when she's not doing homework and stuff, doing some more coding stuff. In fact, I'm looking to start a local meetup group here in Salt Lake for people who have kids that are interested in coding, and they can just go and learn about that.
And I'm assuming she's going to be part of that because she's adorable.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And you're going to bring her back to ngConf, I hope.
I hope so. We'll see. Let's see what happens. But she's wanting to do it again, so we'll probably give it a shot.
She was super cute.
Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Especially getting more kids involved. Some of us have kids, and we've been thinking about that. And yeah, that'll be cool. You have to let us know. Keep us updated on that.
Absolutely.
All right. So third-party libraries and using them within Angular. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So this is a topic that I've kind of been thinking about for a while. It seems like a lot of times when a group of people who have web technologies already in their company or existing projects, they want to move to Angular, but they've got so many ties to third-party libraries, and they've invested a lot of time and effort into working with these libraries and getting them to work the way that the business needs them. So a lot of times, it's not super obvious how you can use Angular with these libraries and be able to get all the benefits of Angular without having to just go and rewrite everything.
So when you're talking about third-party libraries now, are you talking about the Angular Bootstrap project or something like those type of libraries? Or are you talking about projects that might not necessarily be written in Angular? Maybe we're talking like jQuery widgets or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, more like that. Because I mean, a lot of the Angular things have really good documentation on how to get them into your Angular project. But for, as you said, jQuery widgets or other popular JavaScript libraries, or even some in-house libraries that may have been built by a company, those still have value, and wanted to talk today about how we can kind of incorporate that into your Angular projects and still kind of be able to get most of the benefits that Angular has to offer, not having to sacrifice ahead of time compilation or testability or things like that when putting those in.
Yeah, there's a lot of those challenges that come up, right? When these third-party libraries are not Angularified for us already, right? And we have to tackle that. So that'll be really
Right.
interesting to hear how.
Yeah,
how we
I know a lot of engineers that will, when they get started, they're like, "Oh, look for an Angular plugin for X, Y, or Z," right? And you know, sometimes there isn't one, and sometimes there is one, but it's not very good. So it's very important to understand kind of how you can thread those libraries into the fabric of your Angular app.
So to start off, like, what are some of the challenges that you see when you try to integrate these libraries?
Well, a lot of times, a lot of the libraries are written kind of with ECMAScript 5 in mind. And you look at Angular and, you know, you've got TypeScript and Webpack and ES6 and all this stuff. It just looks very foreign and not very much like what you would see in any kinds of documentation or tutorials for these other libraries. So it can be a little bit intimidating. Also, as I said before, you don't want to sacrifice some of the great things that come with Angular 2 and above, like the ahead-of-time compilation and the dependency injection and everything like that. There's definitely some naive approaches you could take, putting things in and just kind of clobbering all that while you're at it.
So you mentioned AOT and dependency injection, things like that. Another thing that I've found that comes up a lot too is how it plays with change detection too, and some of those challenges there, right? Especially
yes, that's very true.
Code that has like set timeouts or intervals in it in these third-party libraries. You got to be aware that that's, with the monkey patching and the zones, it's firing change detection. So now you got to do some stuff around there. So there's a lot of things that you got to kind of get ready to bring in these third-party libraries for, or be aware of, right? And some of them are not that apparent.
No, and definitely some of them are easier to integrate than others. But I have a few examples that I've put together over the weekend that should hopefully give you some ideas of different approaches you can use, depending on the library, to be able to get it to work with your Angular app and get it to work well.
When you're using, kind of talking about the change detection, when you're using these apps, like, there's this concept like single source of truth for your DOM. And so really, in an ideal world, like, Angular is the only thing touching your DOM, and it makes the DOM, like, for Angular, it makes it predictable and what's going to be there. So when you have these external libraries that are actually touching the DOM and manipulating, it kind of like creates, now I've got multiple different things all touching the DOM, and Angular is like the single, one that should be doing it. So great well together is very difficult from what I've seen.
Yes, I agree with that. And I guess that's a good thing to kind of start off on, is kind of a disclaimer. Even though you can integrate just about any JavaScript library with Angular, sometimes, depending on the case, it may or may not be the best thing. As you said, introducing some libraries, like, just off the top of my head, some certain jQuery things just kind of do whatever they feel like doing, and they can kind of mess up your ability to keep the DOM under wraps with Angular. But we're just going to assume for today that you've done the research, you've tried to look for alternatives that work with Angular, things that would work, but you kind of get to the point where it's either you don't go with Angular or you have to use this library with Angular. And so that's kind of the assumption we'll operate on today with the examples we're going through.
I got one other thing that kind of comes to mind too in this is the setup and delivery of these third-party libraries to the client, to the browser, right? And so, like, if we're using something like the Angular CLI to power our Angular app, that story maybe becomes a little bit easier. But if we're not, then we need to kind of think about, like, the delivery, right, of that, and then the usage of that within our code, right?
Absolutely.
Stuff that one of the issues I've had to work with in the past is, talking about what you were just saying, Justin, is things that pollute the global or the global window object. They attach to the window object. So you have to, like, have these I forgot what it's called now, but there's like a Webpack Provide plugin that lets you like shim that. So those are some other challenges that I can think of that I've had to deal with in the past.
Definitely. All right. So you want to get in there, show us some stuff, and kind of take a dive through some things?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll try to pace it so that we can get through all the examples, because there's a lot of good stuff here. But I just wanted to kind of go through a few of the popular libraries that most people would be aware of, and kind of show how you would wire those into your Angular app. So because I'm worried about, making sure the AOT works and everything, I've started with the Angular Universal Starter. I probably could have done the same thing with CLI or with the ASP.NET Core Starter, or a few others, but I think that most of the principles should be the same. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and we can get started. Let's see. How do I share my screen on here? Let's see.
So on the toolbar on the left, there should be like a green screen share button.
Ah, I see it. Perfect. And I'll move the screen. All right. Can you see VS Code there?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. And just for everyone's knowledge, I've posted these examples at my GitHub profile. Wow, that's really small. And it's let's see, where did it go? There we are.
I like that.
Oh, thank you. It's called ng Integrations. I just forked it from Angular Universal Starter. So if you go and look at Joe Skeen, you should be able to find the ng Integrations. And I'm sure we can include a link to that in the video on YouTube as well. But we'll go ahead and get started here. So this is just the Universal Starter, as I said. I haven't done anything special with it yet. So the first example I wanted to cover is D3. Who here has worked with D3 before? Yeah, everyone. It's a pretty awesome library. And I just went and looked at these examples here, and I thought, it'd be cool to do a bubble chart kind of like they have here, but do it as an Angular component. And so that's going to be our first example here. We're going to go ahead and switch over here. And there we go. What's that? Sorry, just getting things up on my other screen so I can actually look intelligent here. Oh boy. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I've taken the D3 example there, and you can find the source code on the website. I'm just going to create a D3 folder here for our D3 example. And to save us a little bit of time, I'm just going to pull some code over here. So I'm going to make a module for that, d3.module.ts. And nothing too crazy here. I haven't defined these components yet, but we're just basically routing there. And we're also going to put it through the dependency injection. One of the first things I like to do when I'm bringing in a third-party library is wrap it up in its own file for Angular. This is kind of a convention I like, putting the name of the library .lib.ts. And then what you can do is you can create an injection token for it so it can go in through the dependency injection. And you import the library, and then you can export basically everything from the library, its types and everything, so that you can kind of just use that file rather than having to go to the actual library in your component.
Hey, Joe, can I pop in with a comment there?
Absolutely.
I love this so much, and the reason why is because there was a project that I was working on that was kind of a large project, and we had a dependency for another. It was something that we were using quite a bit, and it was used throughout our project. And for whatever reason, we had to change. We needed a new vendor to handle that for us. We switched to some new software, and it was such a pain to go through all of our files. I mean, it was like 85 different files that we had to go through and change that because we were calling that third party. And if we had done all of that in a separate file, we would have only had to change it in one place. So this is beautiful. I just want to say that. I love that.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going ahead and installing D3 there. It looks like I probably haven't installed Angular either. So we'll let that happen in the background for a second here. But
the other good thing really quick about that too is that it gets you into the dependency pipeline, right, with the third-party lib. And so now you're doing it kind of like the Angular way, right, which is also ideal for getting those in rather than just referencing them off the global scope or something in the code that you figure out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've seen a lot of people, even on Stack Overflow and everything, where it's like, how do you use this with Angular? And they're like, oh yeah, you just import it, and then you use it directly. And I'm like, man, that makes it a lot harder to test.
Yeah, you really want
that's exactly it.
Stuff.
Okay.
Yep, it's that inversion of control in that testing scenario where it really shines.
Exactly. And unfortunately, this starter doesn't come with tests like the CLI does, so I won't be able to demo that really easily. But you'll see that magic if you try doing it. It's amazing. Okay, let's see if I've got everything now.
Or you can be like me and learn this stuff the hard way.
There we go. Now it's happy there. Okay, so we've wrapped up D3 here. And again, just to walk you through this is an injection token, which is basically a manual way of threading something through the dependency injection in Angular. You create this token, you call it whatever you want. I think that's actually optional. You can just make an injection token. I'm just going to export it there, and then in the module here, I can say, whenever you're asked for this token here, use this value, which here is just the D3 library that we've exported here. So we imported everything as D3 lib and then exported D3 as that. So that's just basically same thing as if you had just imported it directly. We're just passing it through there. Also, I've created a type alias here so that we can be able to, when we get to our constructor, we can give it a type and everything should just work. Okay, so I think that's enough for that. Let's go ahead and create a component that uses this. So I'm going to call this D3 sample chart dot component, if I can type, .ts. Okay, so this is mostly just the code that's on the example. I have done a little bit of massaging with it, and afterwards you can kind of take a look and see what I've done with it. But the core of it is basically the same. The thing that I have changed is where the source of data is coming from. In the D3 example online, they have a CSV file that they're pulling from, and they use d3.csv to read the data in. In my version, I wanted it to be able to pass data from Angular into the chart and have it be able to update. After all, that's one of the great things of Angular, right?
Right.
Another thing that I have done to kind of help with this is I threw an interface together. So let me put that in there. Chart data element .ts. And this is just basically going to give a contract for passing stuff into this chart. So the data that we're passing in just has to have a name, a category, and a value. So as I said, this is where the injection's happening here. We're injecting this D3 token, and since we don't have anything else to go off of for Angular at runtime for the for providing this, usually you can just use interfaces, but in this case, the interfaces wouldn't exist, and TypeScript wouldn't know what to do. You can't tell Angular to provide an interface. You have to have some kind of object there. So that's what we're doing here, using the inject, and then we're using the type there. And so now this is just wired in, and it's just as if you had wired in any kind of service in Angular. You can use it like that. Now there is a little bit of a caveat there, because D3 does do some manipulation of the DOM. And so when you're doing things with ahead of time compilation, you have to be very, very careful that it's not trying to manipulate the DOM directly on the server. So that's the next part of it here. So I have my SVG that it's going to be manipulating here. But I've also imported after view init and implemented that there. And basically that's just a lifecycle hook that allows you to run some code after all of the DOM is there and checked and everything. And so I'm doing that after that. Now, I haven't had any problems with this with the ahead of time compilation. You'll see later in the Jquery example that there is some troubles here, and I have to do a little bit more guarding. But this, for me, works. The other part of it is being able to wire into the change detection here. So what I've done is we've got this input data, and so I'm listening on ng on changes, and I'm going to also update the chart then. So that's basically it. Does anyone have any questions about that? You kind of get where I'm going with this?
I do. About the where did you bring the D3 library in and the types for that D3 library?
Oh yes, that's a good point. So I just npm installed D3 and did the save dev for @types/D3. So the definitely typed repository has type definitions for D3.
And can you explain really quick why that is a valuable step as we bring these third-party libraries in, that we want to try and look for those types?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that there's some people that think either way about the usefulness of TypeScript. I find it very, very useful to be able to check and make sure you're doing things the way that you think you're doing them. And in this case, when you're bringing in third-party libraries and kind of mixing things together, it's really good kind of as to keep your sanity as you're mixing things together, to have these types straightened out. Definitely Typed is a repository that was started by the community, and they're just out to describe all these popular JavaScript libraries with TypeScript definitions. I've actually contributed to it as well. It's a really great source of sane tooling for these JavaScript libraries as you're using them.
So can you go back to the interface real quick that you set up?
Yep, for sure. Let's see.
No, that's a good question.
Yep.
I'm sorry, actually the libts. Sorry.
Oh, this one.
Yeah. Okay, so you've brought in D3 as the library in your npm, installed that. Then you've also installed the types for D3. And that on line 6, what you're doing with that type that you're setting up for capital D3 is you're allowing that to flow through your injection token setup, essentially, so that because you have the types, so that if somebody used the D3 lib directly, then they would get the type hinting and everything. But because you've wrapped it kind of in injection token, you got to flow that through. So now you've also grabbed the types from that D3 lib and passing that through. So now everything's going to be nice when you get into your component and you get some, IntelliSense type of typing.
Right, and you see I aliased it here, and I can just say D3 dot, and I've got everything that you can do with D3. And so that's really, really awesome, just like what you get when you're working with Angular directly. So.
And then really quick, if we run into and we use a third-party library that doesn't have typings out there, what's kind of the strategy on there? Do we go out and start thinking about like writing our own type definitions for that, or do we just kind of roll with it?
I would love to cover that topic in depth on another occasion, but basically, yeah, you have a few different options. You can either any type it and then just trust yourself to do it right, or you can create your own kind of stub definitions. Like sometimes there's like a jQuery library that doesn't have a definition, so I'll just do something like declare interface jQuery, and then like that, something like that, and then it will actually allow you, when you have a jQuery object, it will extend that interface and allow you to call pop-up on it. So you can do things like that.
Another thing that if you don't have types and you don't have the time to blow out all the types, in I think it was TypeScript 2.2, they introduced the ability to like alias any everything that could fall beneath that. So it's like declare module and then it's like export star as any or something like that. That way you don't even have to fill out functions there.
That's a good point. And also they've improved their ability to look into JavaScript libraries and figure out what's exported from it. So you can get some actual limited help even when there aren't type definitions available. It won't be as good as with the definitely typed, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah, and that's a big thing that they're working to improve. You know, the gap between, and I've spoke with some of the team members, and the gap between what's typed and what's not, it can be really frustrating. So improving that experience and getting more type libraries out there for the things that aren't TypeScript is something they're very much actively pursuing and trying to improve.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm gonna run this. Oh, whoops, hold on. I'm doing this in my other window. Just a second here. So I think that's all we need there. Oh, the next thing that we need, so we've created this component here. We also need to create something that actually uses it. So I have a D3 sample component that I built out. D3 sample component.ts. And here we're actually going to use a data service that I'm creating. Let's see. Service. Just so you can see I'm not doing any hand waving here. Whoops, .ts. And I've for this example, I went out to Angular.io, and they have a JSON document that describes the entire Angular API, and I just kind of copied that into here so that we have a good data set to work off of. So the original example for D3 was showing the Flare class hierarchy. I wanted to do something a little more Angular, and so here's all of the classes in Angular. Kind of big
Nice.
data set there. So I've wrapped it in observable just for the purpose of doing this. I'm not doing too much with the backend, so I didn't pull it through there. But what we've got here in this D3 sample component is we're just basically using our sample chart. We're binding the data in, and that's about it. So grabbing that, we have to massage the data a little bit to get it to this chart data element interface that I've created here, and to get it to work with the D3 hierarchy. So there's not a whole lot going on there. Let me go ahead and open this up in the browser, and you can see what this looks like. Post 8000. Okay, so, oh, and I did a couple of other things like routing and all that jazz. But this is the Angular API. It's kind of cut off. And the weights for the circles, I didn't have time to do anything cooler. I just, the number of characters in their name. So the really tiny circles are the really short names. But yeah, it's pretty cool. It didn't take me very long. It took me maybe a couple of hours to pull this entire example together. So it's not too hard to pull in D3 and get it to work with Angular.
Nice. That's very nice.
Okay, let's see, 12:30. Okay, so for the next example, I wanted to bring in some other things that people like to use. This example, I'm going to call this level, call it dates. And we're going to do some date manipulation stuff. And what is the best library to use when doing date manipulations?
Moment?
Yeah, at least I'm partial to it. So we're going to go ahead and bring moment in. And moment.lib.ts I'm going to create. And now I've done something that's slightly different this time, and I'll explain why. Moment and yarn types moment dev. Okay, so this is something that can be a little bit of a pain point when you're working with this stuff. I had, as you noticed in the other one, I was exporting the entire D3 stuff here, so I can, call whatever I want off of there. With moment, I tried doing that. Export star as moment from, oh, actually it wasn't as star, or as moment. Export star from moment. I tried doing that and it says, oh, they use the export equals, so you can't do that. I was like, man. But as it turned out, for this simple example, all I really needed was the moment class. And so I was just able to do that. If you wanted to pull other things out, you can do that. But again, the actual moment, I've exported the moment static type. And so most of what you're going to need, you're going to be able to get between these two types here. So it won't be too big of a deal. For this example, what we want to do is create an input box that you put a date in, and then you'll use moment to display the relative time of that date. So like 3 days ago, or 5 years ago, or whatever. Moment has a function called from now that allows you to do that. And I was thinking it'd be really cool to implement that as a pipe in Angular. So let's go ahead and create our pipe. We're going to call it moment from now.pipe.ts. And I'll go ahead and grab the content from that. This was the first time I actually created a pipe, so that was kind of cool. It's really quite easy. So I named it moment from now. It's not a pure pipe because it's always going to be going off of now, and now changes. So I put pure as false. Again, I'm injecting the moment token so that I can have an instance of moment, or rather a reference to the moment library there. In the transform, I'm basically saying it could be a string, it could be a date, it could be a moment, really it could be anything. But the point is, if it's not a moment, I'm going to turn it into a moment by wrapping it with the moment function. And then I can just call from now on it. And you can see it has the full library available here. So that was a pretty easy win. Compared to what we did on the last one, this is pretty simple. So I went ahead and created a sample here. Let's see. I'm going to give a little bit away here. Dates sample.component.ts. And so what we're doing here is we've got an input, and we're going to pipe it to moment from now to give you an example of how far away from now it is. We can go over here and take a look at this, and I can say, oops, I've given away a little bit of the secret sauce from later. So let's just say, how far is it from Christmas? Oops, 2017. That's in 4 months. So our moment pipe is working here. Now there's some other considerations here. I'm not showing like this whole you're not supposed to just give it garbage kind of thing. I could clean that up with a little bit more time. But the point is, bringing moment in was pretty easy, and getting that to work with the pipe was pretty simple. Any questions on that before I move on to the elephant in the room of jQuery? Nope. All right.
Nope.
Cool. So I wanted to do a jQuery example because there's, even though Angular is awesome, you look out there and still over 90% of websites that are using JavaScript libraries are using jQuery. So it's quite common in a professional setting. You might have to end up integrating with some jQuery stuff eventually. So I decided to go with the jQuery date picker because it's a pretty simple example, and it gets the jQuery UI put through there and everything. So let's go ahead and do that. So in this case, jQuery, it's kind of a little bit different because, as I said earlier, it just wants to be in charge of everything. It wants to own the DOM. It wants to have globals everywhere. And all of the libraries that use jQuery depend on that, jQuery UI especially. So I wasn't able to wrap it up in a lib.ts, at least I wasn't able to in the time that I had figure out how to make that work well. But what I did do was figure out how to get it to work with ahead of time compilation and not be able to sacrifice that. So in order to do that, what I had to do was, first of all, I went into our, let's close some of these things, clean that up, into our Webpack folder here. And here we've got some plugins that are listed here. And I went in and created a Webpack oops. Oh man, I haven't imported Webpack. That's kind of funny. I think in a Webpack config file you'd have Webpack. Webpack dot provide plugin, and I'm passing that some stuff that we're going to use globally here. So we're going to use $, and that's going to reference the jQuery package, which again we just npm install that. jQuery, and window.jQuery. It's going to be jQuery. And we'll make sure we actually have those. Add jQuery dash UI, and that's the official package for jQuery. So let that do its thing there, and we'll grab the types for it in just a moment there. But basically, that's the secret sauce with Webpack. And if you have other loaders, you might have to do other things. In an ASP.NET one that I was looking at with a colleague of mine the other day, they actually just had to add it to the index.chtml because they didn't have Webpack. Or you can add it to script bundles or things like that. So the point is you want to make sure that this ends up being available through whatever bundling system you're using. Yarn add types jQuery and add types jQuery UI. Whoops, UI. And that one doesn't have a dash, which is kind of weird. But that brings in those types. Okay, so now that we've got that set up, we can do basically what we need to in our directive. as I said, directive. We're going to create a directive so we can use the jQuery date picker on an input element. So I'm going to call this jQui date picker directive.ts, and stick all this into here. Basically what I've done here is I've referenced the types here because I'm not going to, well, actually I may not even need to reference those there if I'm doing the import. I don't know, I'll play around with that later. But the thing that I had to do so that Webpack would recognize we're actually using jQuery and that it needed to not tree shake it out of our app is do these import statements. So I did a jQuery, I imported the CSS, I had to add the CSS loader for that. And then I add in the widget state picker. Then for my directive, I said it needed to be an input and it had to have jQuery UI date picker as well as ng model, which comes from Angular Forms, which I also added in. So this is one thing that I learned that was kind of cool. If you have a directive or a component that is doing things outside of the change detection and you want to kind of bring that back into the ng model change detection, you can just specify an output event emitter called ng model change, and then what you do is whenever things change, you can just emit that value and it will bind it back into the ng model. So that was pretty cool. The other thing that I needed to do was make sure that, oh, and this could be actually ng after view init instead of checked, but I did a if is platform server return. So Angular provides a platform ID that you can inject in. That's just an injection token that gives you your platform ID. And it also, in Angular Common, you have this is platform server and is platform browser, which allow you to detect what platform you're on. And in this case, we don't want to do anything with DOM if we're on the platform server. So we're just going to skip that. And then we can just wrap jQuery around this l.native element that we've injected in. So this is an element ref to the element that the directive is on. So we can inject that, wrap it in here, and then jQuery will be able to just do whatever we would normally do with jQuery. And you see we've got the auto-completion for date picker. It has a select callback that we can use to push that value. When the date picker selects, it'll push that value back into ng model. So now that will go through the change detection system. And so bring that back up here. Yeah.
Joe, is that platform server check something that we're going to want to do on a regular basis if we know this third-party lib is touching the DOM, or is it maybe conditional on saying, look, are we going to, think about doing server-side rendering or other things down the line, or is it just good practice to probably do that?
It's kind of a case-by-case basis. With the D3, I didn't end up needing to do that, and it worked just fine with the AOT. So it just really depends. I'd say just throw it in there, see if it works. If it blows up, try throwing in the platform server. Obviously, you don't want to divert your code too much and have it branching out, having completely different app if you're server versus client wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So you want to be careful and not going overboard with it, but it's there for a reason, and if you need to use it, use it.
Cool.
At least that's, my 2 cents. So now we've got the date picker. We don't have all the CSS working. I wasn't able to figure that out, but it does have some of the CSS working. I think we're missing some images and stuff. So I'll go through and try to figure that out. But we can select a date here, and it will tell us, July 10th was roughly 2 months ago. Or, we can go way far back, and that was 2 years ago. So we've got that all working through there. I built this using prod mode with full AOT and everything. You can see that the If we refresh this, we don't have the Angular compiler shipping with it. Otherwise, that would be well over a megabyte there. So everything's working with AOT. Oh, that's kind of funky. And definitely there's some room for improvement, but we've got it working. So anyway, that's kind of my examples I was able to pull together in the time that I had over the weekend. Does anyone have any questions or like, other comments or tips or tricks that you've seen when pulling third-party stuff in?
I had a question about that ng model changes. That's something, because I've seen ng model changes something in Angular already. Is that a variable name that you came up with, or is that you? Because it looks like that's what you named your variable, but then to me that would be confusing because I think ng model change is actually a thing already.
Yeah. So I don't know. I haven't played around with it enough, but when I was searching around trying to figure out how to bind it back to ng model, everyone was always using that exact name. So I think it might be a special thing in Angular, and it just works if you name it that. I could try changing it and seeing if it still works, but that's the one thing that I was able to get it to do. I mean, because you can emit all kinds of events, but they won't always go back to ng model. I think that's something that is special. So
I got you.
It's actually, if you put change on the end of an emitter with the input. So if you were to put like not ng model, but like selected index change, that would essentially automatically happen when the selected index is changed. It's like a
so it's yeah,
so
okay.
On the end of any of your variable, it's going to pick it up, and it's going to in the the digestive will know to get that.
Yeah,
that's cool.
That is cool.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That is really, really neat.
We always learn extra stuff on AngularAir.
Yeah. Yeah, and as I said, I mean, I've done things like this before. I've never actually gone through and done jQuery before, and so that was a little bit of a challenge over the weekend for me to figure out, but I think it was pretty cool.
Hey, so I have a question.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
I was gonna say, I wonder if that would we could do we could start naming our outputs panda change, and as long as
yes,
on the end, it would be. I might do that from now on, Austin, since I learned that trick from you. Everything's gonna be called
with the emoji too. The emoji.
Well,
yeah, for sure.
But before you do panda change, wouldn't you have to have like a panda directive or a panda event?
Panda input.
Does everyone have a panda directive in their project?
That's true.
I guess the real question is when is Panda.js coming out?
Austin, I think that's on.
NG Panda. I need to still jump on that domain name before someone gets it.
Oh yeah, that'll work announcing it here, right?
Yeah. It's probably already registered now.
I think my daughter's gonna steal it and your mask.
Right. All right, so I've got a question on the thing I was mentioning a little bit earlier with the running outside of Angular in the case where you run into these libraries that are doing set timeout or set interval or stuff like that.
Right.
Could we discuss that just a little bit?
Absolutely.
I don't know, maybe we could
show
that or something.
Yeah, and I didn't have any in my example, but there is a bunch of zone stuff that you can bring in. I'm trying to remember where I think the ng zone's in core.
So just really quick describe what the problem is, what happens and why we have to kind of do this sort of thing.
Yeah, so Angular's kind of got its thing going on, but sometimes you need to run stuff outside of Angular for various different reasons. I don't know if anyone else could describe that better.
Yeah, so I brought in, go ahead, Austin.
Well, I was going to say, I've got a drag and drop library that when you drag things, it is emitting those events, right? It's using the native DOM events, and Zone would try to run every time that event was executed. So what I had to do is I had to actually fork it, and then everywhere where it was doing that drag event, I had to do this.zone.run outside of Angular. And then that allowed me to still do my operations, but it was running them outside of the zone detection, so it wasn't triggering a change like all the time, every time I dragged something. So it was like a performance issue that I had to do.
Yeah, that's a good example. But yeah, it's pretty easy to do that, and I really love how the zone is just right there. You just import it, you inject it, and then you can just run outside of Angular, or you can actually run stuff. I believe this runs inside of Angular, right? Inside Angular's zone. And then I'm not sure guarded does, but yeah, that's a really good thing. If you're having performance issues, you have something that Angular needs to not care about, yeah, then run it outside the zone.
Yeah, because some of the things you'll see, like I brought in a library that updated a scroll bar, did like a scroll bar within a DOM element, so it simulated a scroll bar, right? And this thing inside of it somewhere had a set timeout or a set interval that it was checking and constantly updating that in case the DOM changed. And so, didn't really notice anything for a while. Then all of a sudden, looking at it, could see like classes in other parts of my application changing in the DOM on a regular cadence, right? And that was because change detection was firing. And as a result of this thing having this set interval within it that was monkey patched to the zones, that was triggering change detection, that now my app is just constantly doing change detection because of that. And so that's when I discovered that, and I had to go back in and say, okay, that's a third-party lib, and I need to wrap that up in the calls to it in order to make sure that change detection doesn't fire as a result of that. So sometimes these are the things that like not apparent when you bring in this third-party library, but you could notice over time all of a sudden that that's causing it. And so that's a good source to think about in terms of these third-party libraries going, maybe I should check there and see if that's causing change detection to fire all the time.
That's a good point. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, back when we were working with Angular 1, the change detection was just happening like so much that we didn't even care, right? But with the new Angular, it's really important because we have those tools now to make sure that the performance is much, much better. We don't want to, bring in these third-party libraries and just completely make it tank our Angular app. We definitely wouldn't want Angular to be destroyed just because, we were irresponsible with our event handlers and other things like that.
All right, well, this has been really cool. You covered a lot of stuff. I think it's been really good, a really good demo, and kind of illustrates some of these patterns to kind of tackle as we bring in these third-party libraries into our Angular applications.
Yeah, and again, all the complete examples on GitHub. I kind of skipped a few things just because I didn't want to worry about the time and everything. But if you go and look up the ng integrations off of github.com/Joe Skeen, you'll find that there. And any suggestions or issues, I'd love to keep on growing this repository, something, samples of different ways of putting stuff that doesn't know about Angular in with Angular.
Very nice. Very nice. All right, well, let's wrap this thing up, get to our picks, and call it a day. All right, anybody have any picks? Austin, you got some picks?
Nothing today.
All right, that's fine. You still have a pass because you built up a lot of picks, so that we're good on that. Bonnie, what do you got?
Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was actually minding my own business this weekend, and I came across the coolest thing, and I got a big kick out of it. There was I don't know if you guys know about Neo4j. They do GraphQL stuff. They're doing some really cool stuff, and it actually kind of fit right in with Joe's D3 thing, because when I'm dealing with a lot of data, like I love to see it. I want to see the data, and when they do a graphical interface like that, I just get a big kick out of that. Anyway, so this guy Michael Hunger did an article. There was a couple of us that were tweeting. There was a girl named Peggy who was looking for women who were using GraphQL. And I answered her and told her that I was talking about GraphQL at Angular Mix. And then this inspired Michael to do this article. And it was really cool. It was like he wrote a query to find women on Twitter talking about GraphQL. And then my name ended up like right in the middle of it because I was talking about, and so I became a query somehow, and it was like super cool. I got the biggest kick out of it. Anyway, so I'll send you a link to that article. But just in general, Neo4j, I think they're doing some really cool stuff, and I've started to play with it a little bit, and it's super fun. So check that out. Especially if you're doing a lot of data and you want to see your data. I love to see the data.
I can attest to the Neo4j stuff. I've been doing some stuff with that too. It's
yeah,
really
and they're super cool. If you talk to those people and just like ask them like, hey, what is this about? What does it do? Can you explain it? I mean, they're really cool. I was talking to Karen, and she's a hoot. So yeah, I would definitely. Yeah, Neo4j is cool. And you guys are using that already, Austin?
Yeah, we do it for cybersecurity incident anomaly and outlier detection to rate incidents to previously associated incidents.
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. There's so many things.
Crazy math stuff that I just like use the package for, but it works really well in terms of like traversing relationships, whereas you would have to use like joins and stuff like that without some type of linked graph set.
Yeah, I've just barely started checking it out, and I'm already pretty excited about it. So I'm going to be definitely doing some more stuff with them.
Like the thing I tell people about like graph databases is graph databases are like how a person that doesn't have any knowledge of databases would think about databases, like just relationships to other entities. So if you think like a social graph, it is a graph. Like, who are my friends? Who are your friends? And how are we all connected?
Exactly. Yeah, it's super cool.
I
like to
well, go ahead.
No, okay.
Good. Okay. Well, staying on the topic of seeing things visually, my pick is Gmaster, gmaster.io. I haven't dove into it yet, but it's a graphical representation of your version control and Git sort of thing. So gmaster.io looks pretty cool. Kind of gives you the visual stuff for your branches and your trees and stuff like that. So another kind of Git client sort of deal. I don't know, fun stuff. So I'm going to check it out. So that's my pick. Joe, do you have anything that you want to pick or plug?
I have one. This isn't something I discovered recently, but I just was thinking about it when you were talking about the working with the DOM scrolling events and all that stuff. This is a library called Janky Scroll .js. Has anyone ever heard of this one?
Heard of it, yeah.
So Janky Scroll makes your website's UX undeniably worse. It's a JavaScript scrolling plugin that doesn't need to exist. So as I scroll down, you see that it kind of janks a little bit. So I just thought that was pretty funny. Someone put this out as an April Fool's Day joke one year. I just think it's funny that developers have time to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. Cool. All right. Well, that's going to be our show for today. Joe, thanks a lot for coming on and taking the time and putting the stuff together and showing us this. We really appreciate it. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. I'd love to do it again sometime. If you have an opening, let me know.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to do that show where we show how to do typing for third-party libraries and dive into that.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Cool. All right. Thanks to all our panelists. Thanks to our guests. Thanks to our viewers for tuning in. Have a great week, and we'll catch you next week. Later.
See you.